Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman will join us in just a moment. Here's what we're looking at. A WTTW News exclusive: indicted former Alderman Ed Burke is set to receive a taxpayer-funded pension. Find out how much.
I think the Bears would definitely entertain that discussion right now.
The deal that might keep the Bears in Chicago. Hint, it does not involve Soldier Field.
Community was horrified.
Live from Englewood in Austin, where families are grappling with mass public school closures 1 decade later. And new research finds 12 million Americans still believe violence is justified to restore Donald Trump to power. And now to our first story tonight. The Bears have been stymied thus far in plans to win tax breaks to build a new stadium in Arlington Heights. That's opened up the door to other communities to try and lure the team, including Naperville, Waukegan, and even Rockford. But Chicago might still be in the game as well. Could the city come up with a late comeback play and lure the Bears to stay? As attractive as new renderings of Soldier Field are, stadium consultant Mark Gannis is positive the Bears have no future there. So what about a new stadium somewhere else within city limits?
If the city offered up a great piece of land with at least procedural assistance and tax certainty, I think the Bears would definitely entertain that discussion right now.
Based on pure conjecture, I found 4 spots that would give the Bears plenty of land to build their new dream home. Starting on the far south side, a massive 415-acre piece of undeveloped land that juts out into Lake Michigan, the former site of a U.S. steel manufacturing plant. Developers have eyed the property, dubbed Southworks, for 3 decades, but nothing has come of it. That could be due to the uncertainty over the cost of environmental remediation and the lack of access to public transportation.
That has a lot of upside if the environmental issues and the transportation issues could be resolved, but it also has downside because who knows when and if and how expensive it would be to address both of those.
So let's head a bit north to a more central location with tons of transportation infrastructure. The 78, a giant parcel of land bordered by Roosevelt Road to the north, the Chicago River to the west, Clark to the east, and 16th to the south. At first glance, what's not to like? 62 acres, centrally located, Metra on site, 3 CTA lines, DuSable Lakeshore Drive and the 9094, all within walking distance. The property is owned by the real estate firm Related Midwest, who plans a giant mixed-use development that includes a publicly funded tech hub connected to the U of I. When asked about the possibility of a new Bears stadium, a spokesperson for Related Midwest left the door open. Quote, "While we are open to discussions around an iconic stadium and entertainment district, we remain focused on the first phase of the development plan, the Chicago Innovation District, anchored by the University of Illinois Discovery Partners Institute, which is slated to break ground in 2024. Jumping further north, the infamous Lincoln Yards development along the north branch of the Chicago River, just west of Lincoln Park and east of the Kennedy Expressway. It's the beneficiary of a $1.3 billion TIF, but recent reports say developer Sterling Bay has had trouble finding financing for its mixed-use plan development. So why not a giant stadium and entertainment district to bail it out? For one, good luck selling nearby residents on the traffic implications. A spokesperson for Sterling Bay pours some cold water on the idea. Quote, "We'd love to see the Bears stay in Chicago. However, our focus at Lincoln Yards remains on executing the vision outlined in the approved planned development." Perhaps the most feasible location has been right under the Bears' noses this entire time. Just to the south of Soldier Field, the giant Park District-owned parking lot, and to the south of that, McCormick Place Lakeside Center, which the city has talked about tearing down for many years. The one problem, the Lakefront Protection Ordinance, which prohibits any new building on the shore. Just ask George Lucas about it. But Gannis says it's the perfect location and the city might need to get creative.
I could see a deal whereby there's a trade-off. The land of Soldier Field becomes more parkland, and in exchange for that, that lakeside site becomes available for a stadium and other potential uses.
So, Mayor Johnson, you've got the ball. Can the city pull out a last-minute comeback? It's time for Chicago to bear down. We know the mayor and new Bears CEO Kevin Warren had a phone call last week. There are no indications that they talked about any of these sites. An outside advisor to the mayor mentioned a few other notable locations, namely the old Michael Reese Hospital site, and then threw out the possibility of, in the spirit of the Burnham Plan, building an island in Lake Michigan for a new home. How about Bears Island? By the way, this is just a preliminary list. If you think there's some spots we missed, send me an email or a Twitter message and we'll look into it. And now to some more of today's top stories, starting with a WTTW News exclusive. Indicted former Alderman Ed Burke is set to receive a $96,000 per year taxpayer-funded pension. This according to records obtained by WTTW News. Burke left office on May 15th after serving a record 54 years on the city council, many of those as powerful chair of the Finance Committee. Burke will start receiving pension payments of $8,000 per month starting in August. Burke paid into the pension funds over 62 years as a public office holder. More on this exclusive story from Heather Sharon and Jared Rutecki on our website. A Chicago businessman is convicted of trying to bribe state legislators in return for favorable legislation. A jury found James Weiss guilty in the scheme to pay off two lawmakers for legislation that would benefit his sweepstakes gaming company. Weiss is the son-in-law of former Cook County Assessor Joe Barrios, seen here. And the trial featured undercover recordings from former state Senator Terry Link, seen right there. One of them where he asked, quote, "What's in it for me?" Weiss faces a potential 20 years in prison. Plans to transform Medina Temple into a temporary casino are one step closer to reality. That's after the Illinois Gaming Board greenlit the Bally's proposal for the site in River North. The unanimous vote comes after months of investigations into everyone involved in the controversial project. The decision sets the firm up to get the final permits it needs to open, and it's unclear when exactly that will be. Up next, live reports from Austin and Englewood, where families are still grappling with the effects of school closures 10 years later, right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Chicago Public School students have been on summer break for about a week, but it was around this time 10 years ago that some students walked out of their elementary schools, never to return to those buildings again. At the time, the CPS Board of Education and former Mayor Rahm Emanuel decided to close nearly 50 elementary schools, mostly on the south and west sides of the city, becoming the largest mass school closing in the country. It was also against the protests of teachers, parents, and students. In this week's In Your Neighborhood series, we visit two communities that were impacted by those closures, Austin on the city's west side and Englewood on Chicago's south side. Brandis Friedman and Nick Blumberg, along with producers Acacia Hernandez and Eunice Alpasan, spent some time there today. And we start off with Brandis, who is in Austin. Brandis.
That's right, Paris. So we're standing at the site of the former Emmett Elementary. It's right behind me over this fence. You can see it is under construction. We'll tell you a little bit more about that shortly. But CPS slated this school for closure back in 2013, citing a 34% decline in enrollment over 10 years, about $11 million in needed maintenance and updates that it needed, as well as lacking ADA accessibility. Now, it sat vacant for nearly 10 years until just last month when construction began to turn this into a new workforce training hub. Of course, we'll tell you more about that coming up as well, but it is one of 4 schools in the Austin neighborhood alone that faced closure and one of many more across the west side. Delano Elementary in Garfield Park is one of 50 Chicago public schools closed in 2013, creating conflict for students between the merging schools.
There was fights breaking out, there was truancy breaking out, there was lack of attendance breaking out.
Today, it's home to another Chicago public school, Melody Elementary. Reginald Akeem Berry Sr. is the founder of Saving Our Sons Ministries. He says his organization had to step in to help mediate when Delano closed.
And I thought it was erroneous for them to take these two schools that had been adversaries for almost 40 to 50 years, and put them in the same school. knowing they was representing two different organizations, street organizations, and that was just, again, set up for failure.
Andrew Carr was a guidance counselor at the school. He also had a grandchild who was a student there when the closures happened.
The lasting impact is that the children, they don't trust the school system. Then them as parents, they kind of reject the things that's happening in the school, and they feel like they don't have a say-so in it. They don't have a voice in what's going on, and they kind of give up.
Dwayne Truss was an organizer on the West Side at the time and later a CPS board member. He says the school closings failed to consider the connections that families had to their neighborhood schools.
You had a mayor at that time and the school board at that time was that willing to sever that connection just like that, versus really trying to understand the nuances of communities and knowing why maybe there's a reason why students on this block can't go 2 blocks that way.
Just a couple miles down the street from Delano, 4 other elementary schools closed in the Austin neighborhood: Armstrong, Emmett, Key, and May.
Even 10 years ago, the landscape was very tense. I think it's a scar that takes a lot of time for us to heal.
10 years later, Armstrong remains vacant. May's building was taken over by its receiving school, Leland Elementary, and in just the last year, Key reopened as the Field School, a private Christian elementary. And there are plans for Emmett to become the workforce development hub, Aspire.
For us to rebirth it with a new concept that looks at innovation and looks at ways that we can include our young people into the new economy, and so they'll still be learning, but in a different way.
Chief Development Officer Kiwana Bell says the Westside Health Authority incorporated community feedback and needs in planning the Aspire Center. A manufacturing training center and on-site services for job readiness and vocational training are also in the works. Officials broke ground last month, announcing over $22 million in state and city funds for the project. Community organization Austin Coming Together is among the Aspire Center partners. Executive Director Darnell Shields says the center could serve as a model for reviving other closed schools.
To see those buildings not as just places of desolation, but opportunities for something new that can go into the community, that could help address the problems that we have, and start to build us back from what we lost with that decision being made to close those schools.
So back in 2013, Emmett students were redirected to DePriest and Ellington elementary schools, not too far from where we're standing right now. But today, both are facing enrollment declines between 250 and 270 students each since 2015. And that's 2 years after the schools merged. Construction for the Aspire Center here is expected to wrap up later next year. And in Englewood, there's recent progress on another one of the shuttered schools. That's where my colleague Nick Blumberg is standing by with more on that. Nick.
That's right, Brandis. A redevelopment project nearly 10 years in the making took a step forward today with a hearing in front of the Chicago Plan Commission. A group of grassroots organizations here in Englewood wants to repurpose the former Granville T. Woods Academy into a 48-unit housing facility for people who struggle to find a place to live, including folks who have been incarcerated, as well as a community clinic. But advocate Aisha Butler says there is a lot of work to be done. That building's faced vandalism, including people ripping valuable material like copper right out of the walls.
It's sad and traumatic to walk through these walls and to think about the life that was in these schools. It's been a journey for us to learn to do development from the ground up with an institution as large as this. And we're adding another floor, so it'd be an extension. But as I'm learning with this $21 million project, that this isn't easy work and you have to be in it for the long haul, and it may take 10 years. And I don't think a lot of folks have that patience to do that, but when you live here and love it in your community, we have nothing but time.
Right now, only one of the closed Englewood schools has found new purpose. That's the former Benjamin Mays Elementary that I'm standing in front of. But when this school closed permanently in 2013, it was a tough blow for many longtime residents.
Community was horrified.
We were upset. We were feeling so much of the disadvantage that other communities don't have that impact and, don't have to experience. So we had to kind of walk away wounded. We felt that we weren't being heard. We felt that the children were not being taken care of.
Englewood had 6 elementary schools close in 2013, the most in any community that year. But in the years since that upheaval, Dr. Sheila Martin found new ways to care for children in her community.
Let's see how big you've got.
Shepherd's Hope started out just as a food pantry. It's since partnered with other organizations to transform the shuttered maze school into what's now called the Center of Englewood.
Where we are right now is a little piece of heaven. We have a tidbit of everything that our community may need.
More than 6,000 people walk through the doors every week, receiving health care at Dr. Martin's medical clinic, hot-cooked meals, even fresh groceries.
It's client choice. It's like shopping in a grocery store. So when we put limits on certain foods and others, they can take as many as they want. We always have meat, eggs, milk.
Some Englewood residents have made it a part of their daily routine.
I came by for lunch and, just heading back on out, enjoying the rest of the day. It's really actually part of my daily schedule.
Brian Anderson, founder of Shepherd's Hope, placed a bid on the former school in 2018 with this one-stop shop vision in mind. But with the building having sat vacant for 5 years, he says it didn't come easy.
When I came here after we closed, I was here with the CPS because they were changing the locks. So, and I walked through the building and there was ceiling tiles down all over the place. We found out that there was 9,000 feet of copper cable stolen out of here and another 2,000 feet of 2-inch copper pipe. And that cost us close to $300,000 to replace.
For the last few years, he and others have been working to fill the health care and food deserts in Englewood amid a pandemic.
The last 3 years, it has superimposed the responsibility of people like myself to take care of people that look like me. For any community that has already been dispositioned, that has already been deemed a vulnerable population, is to empowerment, to empower them to know that they can be better, they can do better.
Anderson says about 20% of the population they serve is homeless. 17 other organizations now operate out of the 27-classroom facility. Henry Timothy, who manages operations at the center and knows most visitors by name, says it's become a place of refuge.
I have rice, and I have chicken, and I have rib tips.
This has been the best killed chicken in Chicago. It's a safe haven. There's a lot of shooting around the area, no shooting in the immediate area. Hundreds of people can come here a day. Don't worry about no shooting or no fighting.
Seeing it repurposed is a beautiful thing. I just feel like as long as it's helping out the area, the community, I see kids coming in and out. So, it's like it's nothing ever left.
Now, the moratorium on any additional school closings, it's set to run out in January of 2025. But as Brandis mentioned, a decade later, CPS is still facing the same kinds of problems with under-enrollment at many of its public schools. But with a former educator and Chicago Teachers Union member now serving as Chicago's mayor, many advocates are hopeful that we won't see the kind of mass shutdowns that we did a decade ago. Paris, back to you.
All right, Nick and Brandis, I know there's a car alarm going off behind you. Nice job, and a lot for the new mayor to think about. Thanks very much. And up next, millions of Americans still believe violence is justified to restore Donald Trump to power. We talk with the researcher behind the findings right after a look at the weather. More than 2 years after the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, a new study estimates some 12 million Americans still support violence to restore former President Donald Trump to power. But support for violence is not confined to the extreme right. 22 million Americans say force would be justified to restore abortion rights. Meanwhile, 1 in 10 American adults believe the U.S. government is run by Satan worshiping pedophiles. Such a crazy conspiracy theory, I could barely say it. Just some of the latest findings from the University of Chicago's Chicago Project on Security and Threats, or CPOST. And joining us now to tell us more is our old friend, University of Chicago political science professor Robert Pape, who is the director of CPOST. Always great to talk to you, Professor Pape. So let's talk about that 12 million number. 2.5 years after the January 6 attacks. It's still a pretty high number, although not as high as it was.
That's right. You might think that after 2 years after January 6th, the fires would cool so much that this violent support for Trump would just simply fade away. And the fact of the matter is that's not true. Now, how do we know that? It's because we have now a Dangers to Democracy Index, Paris, that we have been doing for the last 2 years every 3 months and will do every 3 months between now and the 2024 election, that's now being published in The Guardian, one of the world's international newspapers. And this is going to allow us not just to bring this data here today, but to bring it to the world every 3 months between now and the 2024 election. And what you see are really some stunning things that if we could focus on this information about the mindset and really the radical mindset of the American public, it could answer some fundamental questions we have.
And now throw in the federal indictment of Donald Trump, and you did some research and voter attitudes about that. It's kind of counterproductive in that it increases support for the former president. What does that mean for 2024?
What that means is that if we think we're going to solve our problems simply by going at Donald Trump, we're likely going to be making him stronger, and that's what we see in the data. Many people, going beyond the 12 million, there's over 100 million Americans who believe our political leaders on both the right and the left are the most immoral and corrupt people in America. In other words, half of the American public thinks the American democracy is corrupt. That, we know in political science, leads to support for authoritarianism. Why are we drifting that way? And why is this so hard to get a grip on? It's because we're not seeing how deeply eroded the confidence is in American democracy.
You would know this better than anybody, but it's almost uncanny how much this is the biggest factor in drifts toward authoritarianism all over the world and throughout history, this erosion of trust in democratic institutions.
Exactly. The 1920s in Germany, why drift toward authoritarianism? It's because the loss of confidence in democracy and the belief it was corrupt. Why does ISIS have pull in the Middle East? It's because of the belief widely in the corruption of those Middle Eastern regimes. What we're seeing here is the same sequence. The more the public believes our leaders are deeply corrupt, and listen to what's happening on Fox News about how Joe Biden is now deeply corrupt, and of course then on the other side, Donald Trump, deeply corrupt. What this is doing beyond those details is persuading large swaths of the public we live in a corrupt America, which is making it very difficult to pull them away from authoritarian.
There's some other interesting findings in your survey, so it's not just about the distrust in institution, but some crazy conspiracy theories. Like we mentioned, 10% apparently believe the government is run by Satan-worshiping pedophiles. How does that happen?
That happens, we've done focus groups with those people, and it's a version of what I just told you about believing our leaders are deeply immoral. So when you focus group people who believe those things, what they'll tell you is Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Clinton, even Donald Trump got on these planes with Jeffrey Epstein, and what they're saying is if they'll get on a plane with a known pedophile for their own personal gain, they're just as good as a pedophile. And that 10%, it is more Republican than Democrat, but it's not 100% Republican because of what I just told you about
And it seems like the middle American might just throw their hands up in the air and say, you know what, they're all corrupt. I hear that all the time. Lastly, what's the solution here?
We have some good news here in our tracker, which is 80% of the public rejects the idea of force instead of democracy. But they're right now not mobilized. They're all broken up into this fragmented world that we live in the media and in our lives. We need to find ways to lean into that 80%. That's the good news that we can see in our tracker, and that's something that we can build on because there's possibilities.
We need folks to consume the same news outlets, the same objective news outlets. All right, Professor Pape, there's so much we could talk about. I know you're going to put out these surveys every several months in The Guardian, so we'll have you back. Thanks again.
And thank you. Thank you.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
That's our show for this Thursday night. For all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and enjoy this evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.